Hello and welcome everyone to the Postgraduate Certificate in Philosophy information session. Before we start, we just want to let you know that this session is being recorded and will be shared on the ICE YouTube channel, and the recording will be sent to everyone who has registered for the event after the session. My name is Ola Patel and I am Head of Academic Centre Administration at the Institute of Continuing Education, University of Cambridge, also known as ICE. Today in the panel we have Dr. Alex Carter, Academic Director for the Postgraduate Certificate in Philosophy, and we are also joined by our student representative, Clarissa Delgado. We also have colleagues from our ICE marketing team who help monitor the Q&A box. Tonight we'll be running a variety of online sessions to give you the opportunity to find out a bit more about postgraduate courses at the Institute. In addition to our live sessions, we also have a number of video resources on our website, giving you further information on the application process, student support, and interview preparation. If you've missed any of our sessions or are unavailable to attend, then please don't worry, you can watch the recordings which will be available on our website 24 hours after each event. Links to the events and resources are shared in the chat and will also be sent via email after this session. We encourage you to join our Meet the Student session after this one at 7:30 p.m. so you can hear from our students about their experience of learning with us. So now I can tell you a little bit more about the history of ICE. We were established 150 years ago in 1873. We were the first university-led continuing education provider in the world. Today, we offer a wide range of courses to adult learners, including short courses, online courses, residential weekends, international summer programs, award-bearing undergraduate and postgraduate qualifications, and we cover a wide range of subject areas from archaeology to genomic medicine. And I can see my colleague has posted some more links in the chat, so please check them out. ICE is a place where professional networks are formed, friendships are made, and transformative power of learning is recognized. As mentioned earlier, today in the panel we have myself, Ola Patel, on behalf of the administration team. We have Dr. Alex Carter, who I'm sure you are very eager to hear from, the Academic Director for the Postgraduate Certificate in Philosophy. And we also have our student representative, thank you, Clarissa, and Kate from the marketing team who will be supporting the event. Shortly, we'll take you through what you can expect from the Postgraduate Certificate in Philosophy, including entry requirements, teaching style, module content, and assessment. We have time reserved towards the end of the session to answer any questions you may have. So please send us your questions for any members of the panel via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen during this presentation, and we'll pick them up at the end. I'll now hand over to Alex, Academic Director for the Postgraduate Certificate in Philosophy.
Thank you, Ola. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to briefly cover the course content now, which is just to run through what we'll be covering, the sorts of things you need to be reading and understanding, and really the point of learning about philosophy, why we're doing this and what we can apply it to. But also I'll talk briefly about some of the assignments as well and how we arrange the learning and the assessment. So the course is in some ways a tour through philosophy, a historical tour through Western philosophy in particular, starting with its ancient roots in Hellenistic philosophy and Greek philosophy. And we look at a range of different schools of philosophy in ancient life. We look at the Stoics and we look at the Epicureans, we look at Plato and his school of philosophy. We look then at Roman schools of philosophy, and then a look at how they developed into early Christian ways of thinking. This then leads up to the modern period where we do skip a lot of the historical to get towards Kant. and we look very narrowly at one of Kant's texts. This can be very difficult to read because Kant is a very difficult philosopher to engage with if you're new to philosophy. But it is a very rewarding one because so much of philosophy has to travel through Kant before we get to our contemporary modern view of philosophy. Kant is also building on what has gone before somewhat. So we do look at philosophers like David Hume, René Descartes, and Leibniz. We look at how their philosophies informed Kant. We then also look at how his philosophy informed other modern philosophers like Hegel. And then Hegel is a good bridge going into Kierkegaard, because Kierkegaard also was reacting to Hegel in not a very positive way, in presenting a more subjective view of how we should understand the world. So the journey we take through those historical periods is fairly rapid. You get one weekend covering each of these different areas. You will do a lot of reading. There will be recorded lectures available. There will be other resources because this is the University of Cambridge. So there are resources all over the place where you can engage as much as you want in learning more about ancient Greek philosophy through faculties and departments that teach these topics, but also engaging with the many e-resources the university makes available. And I also have a back catalogue of lectures that I've done before, which I've left recorded and have made available to all philosophy students at the Institute. And what you're doing really when we're engaging with these topics during the weekends is you're coming prepared, having read and watched the lectures, having read the material, I should say, and watched the lectures. And then what you'll do is you'll sort of work with your fellow students to try and work out exactly what's going on. What are the problems they're trying to solve? I'm very keen on advocating a focus on problems, because if we're not solving problems as philosophers, what are we doing? So this is also where we bring things around to the modern day. And one of the first assignments you'll do will be very much based on the materials that we are using for the teaching weekends. So you'll be applying the readings from Plato, from Kant, from Kierkegaard to specific questions that we have devised in advance. Even then, you've got a large amount of freedom to explore the material as you would like to, but you are addressing a particular question that we're asking. But in the second part of the term, you'll have a one-to-one supervision with me. We'll then think about what problems do you want to try and solve through philosophy. And every year we get a different list of topics that people want to cover. But many of them sort of fall into similar kinds of categories, perhaps, where people are interested in artificial intelligence, people are interested in the concept of post-truth politics, people are interested in terrorism, the ethics of war, for instance. People are also interested in creativity and social problems and how social media has affected our lives. And so many people want to take the philosophy that we've been talking about and apply it. And this is actually surprisingly easy. I've never yet failed to have a one-to-one with a student, even a student who comes to me saying, I don't actually know which problem I want to address. Within 20 minutes, we've identified 2 or 3 possible options. We've then sort of hammered out some questions that they might answer. There's probably one front runner, and then what they'll do is they'll go and do some reading and they'll suggest a plan or an outline to me. And it usually is an excellent idea and one really, really worthy of investigation. So off they go to go and do that. So it's not hugely rapid. It is part-time. We try and flex it around people's lives. We know what that means at the Institute of Continuing Education. We know that people have families, people have jobs, people have different periods of pressure. We flex the deadlines as much as we possibly can. But really what helps people think, what I think helps people stick to the deadlines is having something that they care about. And so increasingly we try and make sure that students are building on what they know, building on their existing knowledge, building on their existing talents, and finding ways of addressing problems that for them are urgent and need addressing. And I do this as a team. So whilst you have your one-to-one supervisions with me throughout the year, and I'm a familiar face that you'll be seeing off and on throughout the year, you will have teaching weekends where you'll be taught directly by one of our 3 tutors. On the left is Martin Parker-Dixon, who will take you through Hellenistic schools of philosophy. He is taught at ICE on a range of topics from classics to creativity. His background is music. He's interested in post-modernity. He's interested in critical theory and wants to think about how research can change our lives. But crucially, what he's interested in when it comes to Hellenistic philosophy is education. The schools of philosophy were, of course, the first universities. They were the places where people were learning all sorts of disciplines, which later got names like psychology and mathematics, things that were philosophy, but then later became their own disciplines. The question then of how philosophy shaped our understanding of how we learn is fundamental to every single discipline. Cecilia Muratori is based in Italy. She is an expert on German idealism, on German Enlightenment thinkers. In particular, her interests lie in mysticism. So she's an expert on Jakob Boehme, and she's very interested in the idea that mystics needed to try and communicate something which is, by definition, incommunicable. I can't even say the word. They are problems. So there's a problem there about how we try to communicate something which apparently, according to the people trying to communicate it, can't be communicated. So how can that be done? Well, one way is through art, through symbolic gesture, through kind of mystical engagement with the world. And that's really where Cecilia's interests lie, which is why she's so interested in Kant on intuition, because Kant is not a friend to intuition, but intuition seems to be an important place where our understanding goes. Many of our students are very, very interested in this concept of intuition. How do I have knowledge without knowing where it came from? That's a fundamental question that we need to try and resolve. Well, mysticism is one way, Kant is another. They aren't friends to each other, but it's in that tension, it's in that sort of conflict between those two different positions that you get some really interesting philosophy coming out. I hope I've done her work justice. Dan Watts is at the University of Essex. His expertise lie in Kierkegaard, but also Wittgenstein, my own philosopher of choice. Kierkegaard is, of course, the first existentialist, but also a Christian. And Dan is very interested in applying existential thought to real life problems. So one of the projects he was working on at Essex was looking at how Christian virtues, so this goes all the way back to the start of our course in many ways, how Christian virtues can be applied in secular contexts like the NHS, for instance. There are many, many empirical studies to show that palliative care is improved when you're in a spiritual or a religious setting. Well, how do we try and harness those benefits for people who aren't religious or spiritual in and of themselves? And maybe it's by making them all philosophers, but I suspect that's just me as a philosopher speaking. So Dan's interests lie there, but he's also a glutton for punishment. He's interested in the two hardest areas of philosophy from my point of view, which is Kierkegaard, who I find very challenging to read, but always a joy to read, always rewarding to read, but very, very challenging, and the nature of thought. And Dan, for some reason, has decided to do Kierkegaard on the nature of thought and to explore that particular question, which has always puzzled me just in and of itself. But Dan is a really engaging teacher. Everyone gets a lot out of his classes. And actually, the one unit that every other student seems to say is the most challenging is Kant, is the second unit. Because whilst it's a very select text, it's trying to understand where Kant is coming from. And a lot of that requires a lot of new abstract thinking. So again, if you're new to philosophy, that can be a very challenging area. Whereas Kierkegaard, the Hellenistic schools, they were very grounded in how we live our lives. Okay, so that's the team. They're a wonder to work with. And we've had the same team working on this course now. This will be the 5th year coming up of this course. And it's just really wonderful that I've been able to work with these people for such a long time, and our students have got so much from them. Speaking of our students, I'm now going to hand over to Clarissa, who is one of our current students, to tell you more about her experience.
Thank you, Alex. So Alex asked me to join this, and we had just finished a weekend with Cecilia, which was wonderful. I guess I'll start with who I am and then lead up to the course, just so as a student, you can see and relate to perhaps the experience. But when I interviewed with Alex in the summer of last year, I had some concerns. I was obviously, I had a career. I had no background, no formal background in philosophy. My background was in history, and then a whole career in the humanitarian and the NGO space. But what I brought with me was a deep personal interest in philosophy that really would just emanated from everything that I had come to experience. And so I think the reason I share that is because I wanted to answer the question, if I was sitting in the audience, one of my questions would be, who would fare best, right, in taking a course like this? Like, who ends up in being able to manage it? And I think there's a certain level of maturity that's expected out of the students who would apply to a course in the continuing education school. And what I mean by maturity is the expectation that you are doing the reading, you are watching the videos, you are engaging with the material on your own time. And so nobody's really, it's not an undergraduate course, so they're not, telling you exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And that you're also sending in your plans or reading not just the course material, but also other material that interests you. So as Alex has already mentioned, get prepared to read a lot, but a lot of that is also because of what should be a deep interest in engaging as a philosopher in the world. What does ICE do well? I think it's, you've just met the team of tutors that we've been working with, and Alex himself, the expertise is clear. So clearly when you're talking to the individuals that are teaching the courses, they really do know their topics, and there's always an engaging conversation to be had. We get excellent guidance. The flexibility of the course has been really important to somebody who is also juggling other roles in her life, right? Whether that's as a career or in personal. And so I think maybe because they've been around for 150 years, they really deeply understand how to be flexible to their students. And I think that's going to fare well in the 21st century as folks are looking for more and more education that is less rigid. And much more accommodating of a life that's honestly all over the place sometimes, it seems. Also, Cambridge has a lot of resources, as Alex already mentioned. So you have great access to online resources, not just the tutors, but Cecilia was explaining to us how we can access, a lot of the online libraries that Cambridge makes available. And these are phenomenal. As well as the general structure, again, as I mentioned, it's a very efficient way, I think, to be educated. And then I think that just leads me to my last closing, and before turning back to Alex, which is the most important thing about why someone would be interested in signing up for a postgraduate certificate in philosophy. And I think philosophy is applicable to every aspect of our lives. And I think the ability to ask why, the ability to discern, or training your mind to reason, these are complicated topics, but at least it's like, if you get started on it, it really helps you begin to think through decisions that you're making, perhaps minute by minute, hour by hour, applicable to management in any industry, as well as the humility to be open to being wrong or to have your mind changed. I think these are skills that are going to be, number one, irreplaceable. These are what make us human at the end, in the end of the day. This is what differentiates us from machines and animals, perhaps. And I think the skill set that you begin to learn by doing this is one that you will take with you forever. And so it is, when I say that it would be something, if you are interested in it, that would be something life-changing. I don't mean that in a glib way. I really mean it will change the perspective with which that you see the world around you. And I couldn't recommend that enough at any age in our lives. So turning that back to Alex.
Thank you, Clarissa. I'd like to say I couldn't say it better myself, but I definitely couldn't have said it myself. So thank you so much for that. That was great. I mean, I totally agree. And one of the things that comes out of doing interviews, for instance, with applicants, which is, of course, usually a larger number of people even than we get on the course, we have the benefit of not getting many more applicants than we have places on the course. So it's beneficial that we can have genuine discussions about this. And typically students who don't make it onto the postgraduate certificate will find a place on an ICE course that could ultimately then lead to the postgraduate certificate. So this is another aspect of the flexibility and the inclusivity of the courses we try to offer, is making sure that no one is ever said no to. We're always looking to find places for you to you can achieve what you want to achieve. But one of the things that comes out so much in the interview discussions that we have, as Clarissa was just saying, is this attention on, I need to find meaning. I need to find some sense of purpose to what I'm engaged with in my life. And yet work and family are very important things. This is why we flex our studies around them. But they're also, there are other things to be interested in. There are other things to engage your time. And I like to think that philosophy is meant to be dealing with these meaningful questions that have kind of bugged us, plagued us for a long time. And I don't think they necessarily give the answers. So don't expect us to be answering the question to the meaning of life. I do have an answer, by the way, I'm just not going to tell you. But you might well sharpen up the question that you want to ask. And that's really, again, going back to Clarissa's point, it's about developing the skills, the critical thinking skills, the development of philosophical thinking. That's what we're trying to do. Thanks, Clarissa, again.
Thank you very much, Clarissa. That was inspiring. And I hope our prospective students have enjoyed that as well. If anyone has questions about application process specifically, or about application support, you can get in touch with our enrollments and admissions team on the email below. We'll now open the session to questions. And I can see we've got some questions.
We have one, yes. And it's from a student asking, so it's an attendee asking, would the PG Cert typically lead on to a master's program after this? And I'll pick this one if that's okay, Ola. I'll pick this one up. But
thank you.
So we are currently developing this course into a 3 years master's course, with the first year being this postgraduate certificate. And the idea would be that if you do this postgraduate certificate, you can then carry that credit over into the master's that we're designing. That, however, is in development. It is not a course that we are offering currently. However, we very much hope to be offering it in the future. In the meantime, quite a few of our students have gone on to do master's study from the postgraduate certificate, both in Cambridge and outside of Cambridge. So we have 1 or 2 students who went to Essex, which is where I did my PhD, which is very nice. They've followed Dan Watts back to Essex to learn more about continental philosophy. One of our students went on to Sheffield to do a master's in political science and ethics. He actually works for the NHS and was trying to develop a new ethics for the NHS. This is, again, what we mean by applied philosophy, trying to find ways of applying the philosophy. And others have applied for not just philosophy courses in Cambridge. Cambridge is very focused on analytic philosophy. So many students interested in philosophy of religion, philosophy of science, questions around continental philosophy or intellectual history. Students who are interested in those areas have gone to other faculties as well. So there are so many master's programs available, some part-time, many not, which is one of the reasons why we want to launch a master's course at ICE, but that is in development, as I say. Oh, our next question, Ola, did you know the answer to this question? What is the average age on the course? Age of participants, I'm assuming.
Well, I can't say on top of my head. I can say in general, the undergraduate, postgraduate and master's courses at ICE attract a wide variety of students, different ages, different backgrounds. Our youngest students are 18. The oldest student we had, I believe, was in his 80s and retired. So whatever age you are, you're very welcome, and you would definitely fit in with our lovely cohorts of students.
I can confirm we don't have a typical student. Sorry, Clarissa, that's not an insult. I like to think all of our students are atypical, wonderfully atypical. And we have it's a very diverse group of people as well, with lots of people from very diverse backgrounds, from class to background in study, ages. I think for a philosophy class, we have a very good gender mix of students as well. So it's a very balanced, very diverse class. And I remember the very first experience I had teaching at ICE was teaching an 87-year-old and an 18-year-old. And we were covering Descartes. And there's a certain card game I call the House of Descartes, which is where they have to organize these cards according to how certain they are that the statements on them are true. And you could see both the 87-year-old and the 18-year-old dealing with the problem in exactly the same way, scratching their heads and thinking, what's wrong with philosophers? Which is absolutely a very healthy response to have, but it is it's typical of the work that we do at ICE.
And I think my experience bears that out. We were just having lunch with, and the backgrounds of the folks having this discussion about Kant or cybersecurity, mergers and acquisitions, a former executive that was, at board level in an international conglomerate and a humanitarian. And so just echoing Alex and saying that I think that is what it's supposed to be. Philosophy is everywhere, and it's a microcosm of the world that we live in.
And we have a number of questions still coming in, which is fantastic. These are people already know how to ask a good question, which is great. So the next question is around not having a background in academic philosophy. And indeed, the next question after that also picks this up. So in terms of the written submission, we are not looking to see you writing high standard philosophy. Much more, the writing sample is about, can you write academically? So this is much more of a test of academic writing, the written submission. The other question around interview, when it comes to the interviews, and Clarissa, I'm hoping will speak to this as well, they are largely informal. They are largely a chance to equally understand where each other are coming from. So if I am asking the student a question, I very much expect them to be asking me questions too, to try and find out, is this the right course for them? Will it achieve what they want it to achieve? And so that it's very much give and take, and it's really to find out if it's a good fit in both directions. So, and I don't know if Clarissa, you would bear that out.
I would say that my experience definitely bore that out. It was a lot about making sure that this was a fit for me, as there's a lot of courses that ICE offers. And I think this is a very specific one. And I think most of the interview was spent getting to know each other, seeing if the general mix that Alex was putting together would work. And the other part of it was this was something that really fit the needs or fit what I was looking for at the time. And I thought it was very fair and also, yes, informal. But it's like applying. Most of the folks who are doing this mid-career have applied to other things in our lives, so it wouldn't be too different from other.
But the purpose behind us having this very open engagement with our prospective students is because I'm not assessing you as philosophers. So yeah. I've done undergraduate admissions for colleges in Cambridge, and yes, there are logic tests and there are philosophical questions that are asked. I remember one of my co-interviewers at one of the colleges in Cambridge asked a logic puzzle right off the bat, and I thought, oh, that's mean to students coming in, some of them 16, 17 years old. That's unfair. But that's what is needed when you're applying to a pure philosophy course that is not about necessarily applying that philosophy, but about rigorously understanding in intricate detail the ideas involved. For this course, I am very keen to see people with a background in economics, psychology, education, history, the sciences. So many different backgrounds have a different bearing. So Clarissa is sitting in a room with people with very different disciplinary interests, all trying to make sense of the philosophy, but all coming at it from a different direction. And this throws up some really interesting discussions that we end up having in class. So that's really what we're trying to establish is, do we think you would be comfortable engaging in that kind of conversation? If we don't think you would be, then we would just recommend maybe take one of the undergraduate courses first before coming to the postgraduate course. I love this next question. What are the job prospects after completing the PG Cert? So there's a classic view, isn't there, of the philosopher as being stuck in the dole queue or not having many jobs. But that's not true. Philosophy is second only to economics in job prospects at the ability to solve complex problems, any kind of complex problem. Mathematics is at the bottom, and you can understand why. If you want general competence around understanding difficult problems, you don't go to a very highly specialized mathematician. You go to someone who says, well, what exactly even is the problem that we're trying to solve here? I would think engineering would be high on that list as well, but economics and philosophy are very high on that list as well. So, and we have seen many students who are working in data science take this course as a way of bridging to a slightly different part of their job, around AI ethics or around data management, what is information? We have a student currently researching in one of our undergraduate courses, actually, but who's likely go on to this course, but he's interested in the idea of intellectual property. Those sorts of engagements around questions that relate to people's work, I'm always happy to have those conversations. If a student says to me, oh, I can apply the philosophy paper, the second paper that we write in a contemporary, I can do that in my own job, can I? So I want you to. I want to find a way of doing the philosophy of X, Y, or Z. So in terms of job prospects, the course is as tailored as you want to make it around what you want to achieve in your long-term goals. Of course, it means going through Kant and Plato and Kierkegaard and so on. But of course, it's also about that philosophy having to have a purpose. Those philosophers didn't wrestle with these ideas for no reason at all. They wanted to apply them in the world. And there are lots of interesting ways of applying those different philosophers' ideas. I don't know if I fully answered that question, but I will say job prospects, I mean, a University of Cambridge qualification always looks good on the CV, but I think philosophy does take people by surprise. They do start to think, oh, and walking into an interview, being able to say interesting things about the basic concepts necessary for one's job, that's interesting. That's always a good thing to have. I'm working in Dubai. I was wondering if there's an option for international students to observe the courses remotely and travel in person for any examinations. So we don't do examinations. It's all by coursework. So that's a very helpful question from that perspective. We do, however, encourage or very strongly encourage students to attend in person for the teaching weekends. That means coming over once per term. Now, if a student said to me, I'm stuck and I can't make it for one of those terms, then we'd say, that's fine, don't worry. That one term, we're recording it, or we can live stream it on Zoom, as we usually do. But if someone said, I couldn't make all three, then we would probably say this might not be the course for you. So we really do want to encourage that attendance. And again, I'm going to turn to Clarissa here to speak to the value of coming in person. Do you agree? I think there's a lot to come from coming to Madingley Hall.
I don't live in Cambridge, and so I commute once a term, and I wouldn't miss it. Like I go out of my way. Again, as I mentioned before, I think there's a certain amount of we're just doing cons, so of a certain amount of your free will that needs to be dedicated to really investing. You'll get what you put into this course. And I think that's what the interview centers around, like how much are you able to put in? And that's what Alex is pointing to now. Like you make the investment to come in the in-person weekend and you will meet interesting people, and philosophy is meant to be discussed. And so it's a dialogue, it's a dialectic. And so that's really the beauty of this. And Cambridge tries its best out of all the programs that I looked at. It's the best at being the most flexible. So I think they already do as maximum as possible, and I'm sure there are other institutions that are a little bit maybe more rigid. By a full person.
We designed it specifically to be 1 weekend per term, precisely because student visas don't require coming, are often quite strict about coming over more than once.
You guys thought of everything. And so again, if you're deeply interested in it, making the time in the schedule to come is what it's about. So it's only fair that there's also an expectation that you do show up in person, and it's just once every 3 months, right, Alex, or something?
Agreed. And if it is impossible, and I realize for many it can be impossible to get to Cambridge 3 times in the year, in which case, please don't rule out our undergraduate courses. The undergraduate certificate in philosophy is not a light course. We're dealing with Paul Grice on meaning. We're dealing with Edmund Getier's problems around justified true belief as knowledge. We're dealing with Hume's notion of vivacity. There are so many different topics that we cover in those units. We actually go through much more content in the undergraduate certificate than we do in the postgraduate certificate. And if you set yourself the bar of, I want to ace this course, then maybe an undergraduate course would be the one where you say, well, I want to do this and I want to do really, really, really well in my essays rather than just get a pass. At the postgraduate level, you might be struggling to hit that pass. We do always help students who are struggling to hit that pass, and I'm very proud to see that many of our students do improve throughout the year in their grades and so on. So where you pitch this can be important, but also things like, can I make it online? Can I make it in person? Those are important questions you need to consider as well. And our undergraduate courses are all available online for fully remote study, but we do try and make them as discursive as possible. We have 3-hour-long sessions of talking just like this, working through the problems together, going into breakout rooms. We don't lecture at you live. The lectures are recorded, you can watch them in your own time and then come into the seminars. It's a great course. I really love teaching the undergraduate certificate. So the next question is around analytic philosophy. I'll deal with this very, very briefly. So I started in analytic philosophy. I then migrated my way to the borderland between analytic philosophy and continental philosophy. Do you know what continental philosophers call continental philosophy? Philosophy. Because only analytic philosophers would recognize a divide between what they do and what others do. But the essential divide is this. If you think philosophy solves problems and then returns us to a state of absolute perfection, you know, it's a zero-sum game. Once you've solved all the problems, you're left with nothing. If you think that's the goal of philosophy, you're an analytic philosopher. If you think life is essentially problematic and that once you've explained everything, you're still left with this inexplicable lump, whatever it might be, this thing that has shape and form, but it cannot be explained, you're more likely to be a continental philosopher. That's my view. It's not exactly a strict definition that many people would ascribe to, but it seems to me to reflect what the differences are between these two different approaches to engaging in philosophy. So we have a question about the nature of the interview as well. And again, it's largely informal, so I won't go much more into that, but it is very much just to see what the fit is like. It is done online. If you wanted desperately to come in person, we could probably arrange an in-person interview, but we would encourage it probably to be done remotely, not least because they are quite short. The interviews, they're not a very long involved process. So if you desperately wanted to come in person, or if you were in Cambridge and you wanted to have the interview in person, we could possibly arrange that, but really what we would look to do is do it online. And as far as that goes, again, the questions are not philosophy questions. I'm not looking to trip anyone up. You don't have to read anything in advance specifically to answer the questions we're going to ask. However, my advice for any interview, for any course in any university in the world is read more and be interesting. I know that's really patronizing and insulting thing to say. I suspect many of you do read a lot, but if you want the best advice on how to pass interviews, unfortunately, it's just read a lot and be interesting. That's it. We're not, if you overly prepare for an interview, we're trained to spot people who are prepared, and we don't really like the conversations that we have with students who have remembered answers that they're trying to deliver. So come be yourself, but engage in some reading beforehand and read some interesting things. And if it doesn't come up in the conversation, throw it into the conversation. Say, oh, I read this interesting thing. Brilliant, I want to hear it. Tell me more. The IELTS score. So maybe Ola, you might want to speak to this as well, but it's currently 7.5, but that's not an absolute bar. And if you were to get 7, we would look at making a case for accepting you. So if you have a 7 in IELTS, please don't rule yourself out. Please do apply, or email ourselves in admissions in advance, and we'll have that conversation beforehand. It is 7.5, but in many of our other courses, it is 7, and we are willing to accept it. But philosophy is a highly technical subject that deals with everyday language, English language, in a very technical way. We use words like idea, belief, thought. These are very familiar terms, but they're used in very, very technical ways, which is why having a sensitivity to language can be really helpful. That said, we've had a couple of Greeks who have corrected me on my Greek, which is fantastic and wonderful. And I've had a few Germans as well correcting me on my German. That's all very, very helpful. So again, having different languages present in the room is always helpful too.
Yeah, I just jump in with Alex. It's just because English is not the only language we're dealing with. So we just finished a weekend on Kant, and we were talking about the nuances in the translations between English and German. And so, yeah.
Absolutely, but there are wondrous tools out there now that philosophy needs to catch up with, things like translation tools. And speaking as a Wittgensteinian who doesn't speak German, I have to say, although Wittgenstein is listed as a British philosopher because all his published works were in English, but I can't take that dodge. There are lots of his writings in German, and it's a pain for me to have to read them, but I'm no expert in German, so it's always helpful to learn the languages. But in terms of the English speaking, 7 would be fine. Anything lower than that, and certainly a very weak score in any one of the areas, would be problematic, I think. the basic readings. So we do publish some of this in advance. My advice would be, don't read things specifically for the course, or if you are reading something for the course, it might be something like an introduction to Kant. As I say, most students find the unit on Kant the most challenging. So it might be a good idea over the summer, for instance, to be prepping your understanding of Kant rather necessarily than reading Plato or Seneca, who we cover in the first unit, but also just reading general philosophy. So reading general introductions to philosophy, histories of philosophy. Martha Nussbaum is very good. The Therapy of Desire is a very good book for the first unit. The second unit, you might want to read some Hume or some Kant or some Hegel. That would be very useful. Hegel's useful because he covers both the Kantian unit and the Kierkegaard unit. So Hegel's a good bridge to read, although I've got a student reading Hegel at the moment and all of his notes start with sigh. He just writes the word sigh because he's still reading about Hegel. He doesn't want to read Hegel, he wants to read the wonderful Simone Weil, but unfortunately he's going through Hegel to get to Simone Weil. But read what interests you, and Eastern philosophy too. So whilst I said that this is a Western philosophy course, that's only because I don't want to do Eastern philosophy an injustice by trying to teach it through a Western lens. That's my expertise, and that's the expertise of many of our tutors. But we all love students bringing an expertise in Eastern philosophy to bear on the Western philosophical tradition. And I've had many students with some very interesting insights on this topic as well. I think we've probably got time for one more, do we think? Okay, I'm getting the nod, okay. So I think I've answered some of these already. So the essays due, yes. So the essays flex a little bit. So we've now instituted an easy to obtain 7-day extension on all assignments that you submit. So if an assignment deadline is creeping up, you've got deadlines at work, etc., you can flex those deadlines a little bit by adding 7 days to the deadline. You can also request longer deadlines. You can also request removal of late penalties after the deadline has passed if you submit it late. So there are all sorts of ways in which we try and make it easy for you to submit. That said, the deadlines for submissions are usually about a month of, you get about a month after the teaching weekend to submit your first 3,000 word essay. You then get about another month to do your shorter essay. And you might say, hang on, the shorter essay is half the length of the first one. Why do I get just as long to write it? Because it's your research paper. You've got to identify a problem. You have to have a one-to-one supervision with me. You have to think through what you're going to cover. You have to do a lot of reading that might be new and surprising to you. So that's why. So it's less directed by the teaching and more directed by you. That's why we give you that little bit of extra time there. But preparing in advance is the ticket always with those sorts of things as well. So having a thought about what you might want to write about in each unit is always helpful as well. Sorry, I haven't answered all the questions, but if anyone has any further questions, please do drop us emails at the inquiries email address.
Thank you so much, everyone, for all the questions. And as Alex said, do get in touch with us because we haven't got any more time to help you with the questions, but I can see them coming, so thank you. We are now coming to the end of our session, so thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we hope that you found it informative. We would love to hear your thoughts via our satisfaction survey, which will be emailed to you shortly, and hope to see you at our other events taking place this week. Our Meet the Students session will start at 7:30 p.m. today, so in about 14 minutes. There's still time to register via the link in the chat, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.